When we begin this conversation about cheating, most people instinctively picture a man. Society has conditioned us to believe that infidelity is primarily a male flaw, that men are naturally more likely to betray, while women, especially Muslim women, are the guardians of purity, untouched by such weaknesses. This narrative is comforting, but it's also misleading, and when we cling to illusions rather than truths, we blind ourselves to the realities unfolding right in front of us. Let's think for a moment about why we even have this assumption. Women are often associated with nurturing, sacrifice, patience. These qualities are beautiful, yes, but they have also been exaggerated into a dangerous myth of immunity, as though women are somehow less human than men, less vulnerable to temptation. Religion, culture, and community expectations place Muslim women on a pedestal. We expect them to be the protectors of family honor, the unbreakable pillars of morality. And while these expectations may sound noble, they can actually create the perfect environment for denial. Because when we believe something is impossible, we stop looking for the signs that it might actually be happening. Psychology gives us a clearer picture. Every human being, regardless of gender, is wired with desires, needs, and weaknesses. To pretend that one gender is somehow free of this wiring is naive. Women may express those desires differently, but they are no less real. In fact, research consistently shows that women, when they do cheat, are often better at concealing it because society doesn't expect it from them. The very assumption that women don't cheat becomes their cover, and this is especially true in communities where appearances and reputations are carefully guarded. Now, when we bring this into the Muslim context, the stakes get higher. The identity of a Muslim woman is strongly tied to values of modesty, loyalty, and family. But we need to be careful not to confuse expectation with reality. Expecting a woman to uphold these values doesn't guarantee she will. And pretending that all women always live up to them doesn't protect families. It only silences uncomfortable conversations. Let me ask you this. How many of you know someone who was shocked when a woman they respected, admired, or even loved turned out to be unfaithful? Maybe not physically, but emotionally. That shock comes from the myth. We never imagined she could be capable of it, so we ignored the small cracks that were there all along. There's also a deeper philosophical layer here. Human beings are dual in nature. We have a higher self that strives for purity and discipline, and we have a lower self that craves instant gratification, attention, escape. Men and women both wrestle with these forces every single day. To act like women are naturally above this struggle is to deny them their full humanity. It makes us blind to their battles, blind to their vulnerabilities, blind to the reality that they too can fall. And when someone falls while everyone insists they were incapable of falling, what happens? The betrayal cuts deeper, the trust shatters harder, and the community is left confused and broken. There's also something else worth noting. When we idolize women as incapable of cheating, we indirectly create pressure that can backfire. Imagine being a woman who feels neglected in her marriage, unseen, unloved. She's drowning emotionally, but her community tells her, "You're the pure one, you're the loyal one, you're the one who never fails." That pressure doesn't remove her pain. It just forces her to hide it. And what is hidden often grows in silence until it becomes something destructive. So let's strip away the myth. Muslim women are not angels. They are human beings. They are capable of loyalty, love, sacrifice, but also of weakness, temptation, and yes, betrayal. And acknowledging this truth doesn't make them less honorable, it makes them real. It allows us to have honest conversations about what leads women down that path, how to prevent it, and how to build relationships that don't just rely on blind assumptions, but on real, active trust and effort. If we continue to hold on to the fantasy that cheating is only a man's flaw, we will never address the silent betrayals that are happening behind closed doors. And the danger is not just in the act itself, but in the denial that follows. Denial keeps families broken. Denial stops growth. Denial kills trust. So let's replace denial with awareness. Let's have the courage to admit that Muslim women, like all human beings, are capable of both great faithfulness and devastating betrayal. And when we acknowledge that, we stop living in illusions and start building relationships on truth. Remember this: the moment we strip away false innocence, we give space for real accountability. And without accountability, there can never be true loyalty. When we talk about cheating, most people reduce it to the physical act. If there is no physical intimacy, no evidence of a body crossing boundaries, then people often dismiss it as harmless. But here's where we make critical mistake. Women, more than men, often cheat emotionally long before anything physical happens. And emotional betrayal, in many cases, can cut deeper than a physical one. Think about this. A man may have an affair that is primarily physical. It doesn't excuse his betrayal, but often his attachment to his wife remains intact. And he still identifies with the relationship he has at home. For women, it works differently. Studies in psychology and relationship dynamics show that women usually invest emotionally before they ever consider the physical. They begin by opening their hearts, by sharing their struggles, their secrets, their inner world with someone else. And the moment you give another person the intimacy of your thoughts and emotions, you are already building a bond that competes with your marriage. Now, here's where it becomes subtle, almost invisible. A Muslim woman may never cross a physical line. She may never touch another man, never meet him outside, never exchange a glance in public. And yet, late at night, she's on her phone, pouring her heart out in messages, confiding what she cannot say to her husband, feeling a sense of relief and connection with someone who isn't supposed to have that place in her life. Is that not cheating? Of course it is, because cheating is not just the body, it is also the heart. Philosophically, loyalty is about exclusivity of the soul. When two people are married, they don't just agree to share a home and a bed, they agree to share their deepest selves with each other. That sacred intimacy is not only physical, it's emotional, intellectual, even spiritual. When you give your attention, your admiration, your trust, and your energy to someone outside of that sacred bond, you have already broken it. Even if your body remains untouched. This is where so many people deceive themselves. They say, we're just talking, or it's only friendship, or I haven't done anything wrong. But if your partner knew the extent of those conversations, the feelings you're exchanging, the comfort you're seeking from someone else, would they still feel secure? Would they still feel you're fully theirs? If the answer is no, then you know in your heart you've crossed the line. The danger of emotional infidelity is that it doesn't feel like cheating at first. It feels like comfort, like escape, like someone finally understands. And that makes it addictive. Emotional cheating grows silently, slowly, until the woman finds herself more connected to the man on the screen than the man in her home. She starts comparing his words versus her husband's silence, his attention versus her partner's neglect, and little by little the emotional foundation of her marriage begins to erode. By the time the relationship at home feels empty, the one outside feels indispensable. That's how many emotional affairs eventually cross into the physical. But even if they don't, the damage is already done. Let's not forget the religious and moral dimension. Islam places enormous emphasis on the guarding of the gaze, the tongue, the heart. Why? Because betrayal starts small. Nobody wakes up one morning and suddenly decides to destroy their marriage. It begins with attention, with words, with the exchange of emotions that were never meant to be shared with anyone outside the marriage. That's why emotional loyalty is as important as physical loyalty. So without it, the relationship has no core. So when we ask the question, do Muslim women cheat? The answer is not only about physical infidelity, it is also about emotional infidelity, which is perhaps even more widespread and more destructive, because you can repair a physical mistake, but when a woman has already handed her heart to someone else, reclaiming that trust is far harder. This is the uncomfortable truth. Cheating is not defined by physical acts alone. It begins the moment loyalty, attention, and intimacy are given away to someone outside the bond of marriage. And whether we like it or not, emotional betrayal leaves scars just as deep, if not deeper, than physical betrayal. So I'll leave you with this thought. If you are sharing your heart with someone who isn't your partner, you are already taking steps down a path of betrayal. Guard not only your body but your emotions. Because once your heart belongs elsewhere, your relationship has already lost its foundation. Cheating doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's not usually about waking up one day and deciding to betray. It often grows out of unmet needs, needs that are ignored, dismissed, or left to rot in silence. And this is something we must understand with clarity. People do not cheat because they are evil by nature. They cheat because something within them has gone hungry for too long. Human beings are wired with 3 fundamental layers of needs: physical, emotional, and spiritual. When one or more of these layers are neglected in a relationship, it creates emptiness. And emptiness is dangerous because it always seeks to be filled. If it's not filled at home, eventually it will be filled elsewhere. Let's look at emotional needs first. Women, by design, crave emotional connection. They need to feel seen, heard, valued, and cherished. If a woman lives in a marriage where she feels invisible, where her husband doesn't listen, doesn't acknowledge her presence, or treats her like a background character in his own life, she begins to starve emotionally. At first, she may endure it quietly, telling herself this is normal, this is what marriage looks like. But the human heart has limits, so when another man, maybe a colleague, maybe someone online, gives her attention, listens to her, remembers the little details about her life, suddenly she feels alive again. That's not just conversation anymore, that's nourishment for a starving heart, and that's how emotional affairs begin. Then there are physical needs. Islam does not shy away from this reality, and neither should we. Marriage is not just a spiritual bond, it is also a physical one. When physical intimacy is missing, withheld, or turned into a weapon, frustration builds, and frustration, when denied an outlet within the marriage, can drive people toward temptation. For men, this often leads to physical cheating. For women, the process may start with emotional intimacy, but make no mistake, unmet physical needs are just as real for women as they are for men. Ignoring this reality only creates resentment and distance. And then, perhaps most overlooked, are spiritual needs. A Muslim woman doesn't just want a partner to share a house or a bed with, she wants a partner to share her faith, her values, her journey toward God. When she feels spiritually disconnected from her husband, when she cannot discuss her beliefs, her doubts, her struggles, she feels like she is walking her spiritual path alone, and isolation in the soul can be just as painful as loneliness in the heart. If she finds someone outside the marriage who shares her values, who sparks her intellectually and spiritually, that bond can become more powerful than the bond she has at home. So you see, unmet needs are not trivial. They are the seeds from which infidelity grows. The tragedy is that many marriages fail not because two people are incapable of loving each other, but because they stop tending to each other's needs. They get lost in routines, responsibilities, and distractions, and they forget the most basic truth: relationships must be nourished or they wither. And let me emphasize this: unmet needs are not an excuse for cheating. Cheating is still a conscious choice, a betrayal of trust, and a violation of sacred vows. But if we want to prevent it, if we want to understand why it happens, we must look beyond the act itself and examine the hunger that made someone vulnerable to it in the first place, because unmet needs are like cracks in the wall. If you ignore them, they expand until the entire foundation collapses. Here's the hard truth: many couples assume that marriage will sustain itself. But love is not self-sustaining. Trust is not self-sustaining. Connection is not self-sustaining. They require effort, attention, and consistency. When you stop watering the soil, don't be surprised when the garden stops blooming. And when the garden is bare, weeds will find their way in. So what does this mean for us? It means that if we want loyalty, if we want faithfulness, if we want trust, then we must commit not only to the big promises of marriage, but to the small daily acts of nourishment, the words of affirmation, the listening ear, the physical affection, the shared values. These are not optional luxuries, they are lifelines. If unmet needs are the root cause of cheating, then the solution is not fear, not control, not endless suspicion. The solution is to meet the needs of your partner with presence, effort, and sincerity, because when hearts are full, they don't wander. So I'll leave you with this: if you neglect the needs of the one you love, someone else will appear to offer them. And by then, it may be too late. Nurture your relationship before it hungers, because once hunger sets in, temptation is never far behind in today's world. We cannot ignore the invisible force shaping relationships, trust, and temptation: social media. It has become a silent accomplice in the stories of betrayal, often making it easier for emotional and even physical boundaries to be crossed. We live in an age where attention has become a currency, and social media is the marketplace. And for women, even Muslim women who are deeply committed to their values, these platforms can become a dangerous mirror reflecting desires, insecurities, and unfulfilled needs. Think about it. Social media is designed to grab attention. Every notification, every message, every like creates a small rush of dopamine, a tiny thrill of being seen, acknowledged, and desired. For a woman whose emotional or physical needs are unmet at home, this becomes a tempting alternative. Suddenly, a harmless friend request or a casual comment can evolve into private messages, personal conversations, and intimate connections that never would have existed without the screen. The boundaries that were so clear in the offline world start to blur. The danger of social media lies not just in what is visible, but in what is invisible. Text disappears, stories vanish, private chats remain hidden. It creates the illusion of a safe space, a world where a woman can explore emotions, flirtation, or curiosity without immediate consequences, and that illusion is powerful. Human beings are naturally drawn to connection, to being understood, and social media offers a constant supply of both. It feeds the same hunger we discussed earlier, emotional, intellectual, and sometimes even spiritual. But here's the subtle part many people miss. Social media is not cheating in itself. It is a tool neutral in nature. The problem arises in how it is used. It amplifies the small decisions that erode trust. A casual compliment from a stranger can be addictive. A private conversation with someone who seems to understand you better than your partner can feel validating. And slowly, without realizing it, these digital interactions start to replace the intimacy that belongs in the marriage. Emotional energy is being invested somewhere else, and loyalty starts to shift before anyone even notices. Psychologically, social media can exploit the human need for attention and affirmation. Women, like men, crave recognition, love, and validation. When these needs are met online rather than offline, it creates a dual reality. She may go home to her husband, but a part of her mind and heart has already been engaged elsewhere. That mental and emotional attachment is just as real as physical infidelity, even if society refuses to call it cheating. And the insidious part is that it often begins innocently, a conversation here, a shared secret there, a compliment that feels harmless. But over time, it becomes a bridge to something more serious. There's also the social comparison element. Social media constantly shows curated images of perfection, happiness, and desire. When a woman compares herself or her marriage to what she sees online, it can generate feelings of inadequacy or longing. Suddenly, a connection that offers attention, admiration, or emotional excitement can feel like a lifeline. And what was once curiosity can transform into emotional investment. This is why social media is so dangerous. It is not just a platform, it is a psychological amplifier. It magnifies loneliness, neglect, and temptation in ways previous generations never experienced. But this is not a story of inevitability. Awareness is the antidote. Understanding how social media can influence our emotions and our choices allows us to act intentionally rather than react impulsively. Boundaries are critical. Time spent online should not replace time spent nurturing real-life connections. Conversations, affection, shared experiences, and attention must remain in the marriage, or the virtual world will naturally encroach. The lesson here is both simple and profound. Screens are not neutral in their effects. They magnify the weaknesses, insecurities, and unmet needs that already exist. And if a woman or a man is not consciously guarding her heart, social media becomes the path of least resistance toward betrayal. Emotional cheating can start with a like, a comment, or a private chat, long before any physical boundary is crossed. And by the time we notice, the heart has already wandered. So the responsibility is clear. Vigilance, awareness, and conscious effort are essential. Protect not only the physical spaces of your relationship, but the mental and emotional ones as well. Invest in your partner in real life, because attention given elsewhere, even virtually, is attention withdrawn from the person who truly deserves it. Remember this: social media can be a tool for connection, but left unchecked, it can also be the silent thief of loyalty. Guard your heart, guard your attention, and remember that the intimacy you cultivate offline cannot be replicated on a screen. Because when the heart wanders online, the consequences ripple through the real world. One of the most dangerous aspects of infidelity is not always the act itself, it's the mind that rationalizes it, the heart that convinces itself that what it's doing is somehow acceptable. Justification and self-deception are the invisible accomplices of betrayal. They allow a woman, or anyone really, to cross moral boundaries while still believing they have not. And this is something we must confront honestly if we want to understand the truth about why cheating happens. Think about it for a moment. A woman may convince herself that the late night conversations with another man are just friendship, that the attention she's receiving is harmless, that she's only talking because she needs someone to listen. She tells herself, "I'm not cheating, I'm just being human." And in her mind, these justifications become shields against guilt, protection against the fear of moral failure. But justifications are slippery. They distort reality. They allow the heart to wander while the conscience nods along, pretending nothing is wrong. Psychologically, this is deeply rooted in how humans cope with cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is that tension we feel when our actions contradict our values. No one wants to see themselves as unfaithful or disloyal, yet the heart often finds ways to bridge that gap. Justification is the bridge. It tells us that breaking trust is acceptable because the situation is different, because the emotional needs were unmet, or because it's not physical. And once that bridge exists, the path to betrayal becomes easier, almost natural. This is why self-deception is so insidious. It masks danger until it is too late. A woman may believe she is loyal even as she invests time, emotion, and attention in someone outside her marriage. She may feel guilt, but she can quiet it with rationalizations. I've done nothing wrong. He makes me feel understood. I'm still committed to my husband in the ways that matter. And with every rationalization, the distance between her loyalty and her actions grows. Philosophically, justification is a betrayal of one's own integrity. It allows us to live in illusions rather than reality, to paint our choices with colors that hide their consequences. It creates a parallel universe where everything feels safe, moral, and acceptable, even as the foundations of trust are quietly crumbling. And the danger is compounded by society itself, which often refuses to acknowledge that women can cheat. This denial becomes a convenient ally. If the world assumes you are incapable of betrayal, it is easier to convince yourself that your actions are harmless. We must also recognize the emotional sophistication involved in self-deception. Women are often more attuned to social and moral cues, which means they can justify actions to themselves with subtlety. They can engage in behavior that undermines their commitment while still feeling virtuous. And that is why emotional affairs, flirtation, or even deep friendships with potential temptation are often the first steps down the path of betrayal. They feel safe, they feel acceptable, and they feel invisible. But let's be clear, justification is not a victimless phenomenon. Every act rationalized erodes trust. Every self-deception weakens the emotional bond with a partner. By convincing ourselves that what we're doing is not really cheating, we are quietly betraying the one who trusts us most. And by extension, we are betraying our own moral compass, our own sense of self-respect, and the integrity of our relationship. The solution is not self-flagellation or paranoia. It is brutal honesty. We must examine our motives, our desires, and our actions without the comforting lens of rationalization. If you find yourself justifying secret conversations, emotional attachments, or inappropriate attention, that is the first signal that boundaries are being crossed. And boundaries are not mere rules. They are the structure that protects the heart, the marriage, and the soul from wandering. So here is the takeaway. Justification and self-deception are not minor lapses. They are the gateways to betrayal. They are the quiet thieves that erode loyalty long before any physical act occurs. And if we do not confront them with courage and honesty, we risk losing not only the trust of our partners, but the integrity of our own hearts. Remember this: the moment you begin to rationalize what should be off limits, you are already compromising. Truth is not always comfortable, but it is necessary. Guard your mind as fiercely as your heart, and do not allow subtle self-deception to lead you down a path you will regret. Integrity begins in acknowledgement. Awareness begins in honesty, and loyalty is preserved through both. At the core of every relationship, every bond, every marriage, lies a principle that is often overlooked in the rush of daily life: accountability. Accountability is not just a moral concept, it is the very foundation that keeps trust alive. Without it, loyalty becomes a fragile illusion, and promises, no matter how sacred, are vulnerable to decay. And yet, in conversations about infidelity, accountability is almost always the first thing we ignore. We point fingers, we justify, we rationalize, but we rarely stop to ask, am I truly accountable for my own heart, my own actions, my own choices? The hard truth is this: both men and women are responsible for their decisions. Cheating is not a product of circumstance alone, it is a conscious choice. Unmet needs, social media temptations, emotional vulnerabilities, these are real, but they are not excuses. A woman, like a man, must take ownership of her actions. She must recognize that her choices, whether in thought, word, or deed, have consequences that ripple far beyond the moment. Accountability is about standing in the light of truth, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it threatens the image we want to project. Consider what accountability really entails. It is the willingness to examine your heart without defense. to recognize desires that are misplaced, and to confront impulses before they manifest in betrayal. It is the courage to admit when emotional energy is being given away, when loyalty is wavering, and when boundaries are at risk of being crossed. Accountability is not about punishment. It is about awareness and deliberate action. It is about taking responsibility before harm is done rather than trying to repair it afterward. Psychologically, accountability is the mechanism that separates integrity from deceit. Without it, self-deception thrives. Without it, justifications dominate. Without it, the human heart drifts in secrecy, believing that actions are harmless because no one else knows. And yet, the very act of turning a blind eye to our own impulses, of refusing to take responsibility, is the first betrayal. We do not need an audience to validate our honesty. The moment we deny our own responsibility, we are already compromising the trust that is essential in any relationship. Philosophically, accountability is also a form of respect. Respect for oneself and respect for the one to whom you have made promises. A Muslim woman, a wife, or any partner in a committed relationship must understand that her faithfulness is not only a reflection of devotion but also of character. To evade accountability is to erode both, and in a world where small acts of neglect or emotional wandering can snowball into deep betrayal, accountability is the safeguard that prevents minor lapses from becoming irreversible mistakes. The reality is that no system of rules, no set of external expectations, no fear of social judgment is as effective as personal accountability. You can be warned, educated, and advised, but if you are not willing to hold yourself accountable for your thoughts, your emotions, and your interactions, the structure around you will not save you. Accountability starts with self-awareness and ends with intentional action. It is the choice to protect your marriage and your integrity before temptation even arises. And let's be honest, accountability is not comfortable. It requires humility, courage, and reflection. It means acknowledging that even if you have never crossed a physical line, your heart may still be at risk. It means admitting when attention, affection, or admiration is being invested outside the marriage. It means confronting the impulses, the desires, and the rationalizations that could, if unchecked, lead to betrayal. But it is precisely this discomfort that strengthens character and preserves trust. So what does this look like in practice? It means setting boundaries with yourself and others. It means having honest conversations with your partner about emotional and physical needs. It means monitoring your own thoughts and behaviors, ensuring that your attention, energy, and loyalty remain where they belong. And it means taking immediate responsibility if you sense that you are straying, rather than hoping the problem will resolve itself. Accountability is proactive, not reactive. It is the difference between prevention and regret. At the end of the day, the hard truth is simple: cheating is not inevitable, but neither is loyalty. Loyalty requires awareness, effort, and above all, accountability. Without accountability, every temptation becomes a potential betrayal, every unmet need a justification, every fleeting attraction a gateway. And the moment we fail to hold ourselves accountable, the bonds we cherish most are put at risk. So I will leave you with this. Guard your heart with honesty, your mind with awareness, and your actions with responsibility. Accountability is not a punishment. It is your greatest tool for preserving trust, love, and integrity. When you embrace it fully, there is no betrayal too small to notice, no temptation too subtle to resist, and no relationship too strong to protect. The choice is yours, and it begins with ownership of your own heart.